Professor Satoshi Morimoto is well known as a national security affairs specialist in Japan. He's had a varied and exceptional career in Japan as a public intellectual. He's been a professor at Takushoku University since 2005, but he took time off in 2012 to serve as Minister of Defense. He graduated from the National Defense Academy in 1965, was an officer in the Air Self-Defense Forces before joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he held several senior positions, including Director of the Security Policy Division in the Bureau of Information Analysis, Research, and Planning, and also served as First Secretary at the Japanese Embassy in the United States. So welcome back to Washington, Morimoto-san. Lieutenant General retired Noboru Yamaguchi is also a widely known public intellectual who also graduated from the National Defense Academy, where he majored in physics. Today, he's a professor there in Yokosuka. General Yamaguchi received his MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, served as senior defense attaché at the Japanese Embassy here in Washington, so welcome back to you as well. Before retiring from active duty in December of 2008, General Yamaguchi served as Deputy Commandant of the Ground Self-Defense Forces Aviation School, Vice President of the National Institute for Defense Studies, and Commanding General of the Ground Self-Defense Forces Research and Development Command. So we're looking forward to your comments. I ask you to please join me up here, and we'll get started. Maybe we'll start with Morimoto-san. Morimoto-san, どうぞ。
It's a great honor to be here and to make my remarks in this occasion. Almost a quarter of century passed through since the end of Cold War period. However, new world order has not yet coming up with. Rather, it seems to me that some symptom of similar type of imperialism of 19th century or early 20th century is back to the history. Some major countries project its power to periphery and seek for the strong military, the stronger economy. This hegemonic expansionism imposes serious concern to many related countries that expect to solve this problem peacefully. Those military-oriented behavior for changing a status quo is not permitted by international law. We can take a look at these indications and behavior in Crimea and Ukraine in Europe, and South China Sea and East China Sea in Asian Pacific region. President Obama's visit to Asia last week was excellent timing, and especially we Japanese people are very pleased to receive President Obama's state visit to Tokyo. It was also extremely successful to demonstrate how much the U.S.-Japan alliance is an important cornerstone for regional peace and stability, as well as the platform for global cooperation. The U.S. rebalances to Asian Pacific and Japan's policy of proactive contribution to peace based on the principle of international cooperation, both contribution to the alliance playing a leading role in ensuring a peaceful and prosperous Asian Pacific. Some news media people are interested in how many pieces of sushi the president took to eat among 17 pieces which sushi artist Sukiyabashi Jiro owner has served for president. I don't care. I quite frankly, I praise the president's visit to ROK that could demonstrate and give a warning North Korea, which might prepare the nuclear testing as provocative action at this time. Also, President visit to Malaysia, we also are very effective to keep close relationship with Malaysia, and new military base agreement with Philippines was extremely welcome for reinforcement of U.S. rebalancing policy and present a Chinese military provocation in South China Sea. In Asian Pacific, while opportunity for prosperity has increased, there is a growing number of issues and tension spreading. China's hegemonic behavior and North Korea missile and nuclear development programs are posing a threat not only the region, but also the freedom of navigation and also U.S. continental. Also, Asian Pacific region has an underdeveloped framework for regional order, while ARF has worked since the early 80s, it is unlikely to develop into the regional framework. One of the impediments to building the regional order is a reluctance of some countries about entering a binding agreement as sharing information with another country due to the political military relations within their countries. This factor has stalled for ARF's preventive diplomacy or code of conduct in the South China Sea and most of substantial development. No dramatic improvement on these issues is currently in sight in my standard. Instead, the countries that share the values of maritime safety should promote joint operation and exercise. The Japan and the United States should share roles in developing security cooperation for improving capacity building measure for ASEAN, encompassing the supply and training and technical assistance. As for the U.S. commitment, the alliance, the peace and stability of the Asian Pacific region is supported by a strong U.S. commitment to the region. The U.S. commitment to including Senkaku Island under the provision of U.S.-Japan Security Treaty is extremely encouraging. We must also thank the United States for sharing Japan's stance on the issues of air defense identification zone. Yet, China still has its territorial ambition over the Senkaku Island and declares them as its core interest. The country will seek the occupation of Senkaku Island in a situation that would not allow the U.S. intervention, similarly to Russia's approach to claiming Crimea. In order to address the issue, Japan must make legislative move to close legal gap or gray zone that could affect the response. Then the law enforcement authority, including Japan Coast Guard and self-defense forces, should work close coordination in steadily maintain the island territorial integrity without provoking China. Efforts are underway to establish a system where the Japan make a primary response to any Chinese illegal attempt to approach the Senkaku Island. Japan is also grateful for the role the United States provides its allies, including Japan, as extended deterrence, Japan has provided consideration to ensure the stable deployment of strategic U.S. military forces in the Asian Pacific region, supporting the deployment of Global Hawk and the second TPY-2 radar or expand radar. While the Japan planned to increase the fleet of Aegis destroyer 6 to 8, United States also made an encouraging move this month with U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel announced the plan to deploy 2 additional Aegis destroyer to Japan, 5 to 7, I think. Reinforcing deterrence based on the Japan-U.S. cooperation has strong significance in terms of missile defense as well as cyber safety, outer space, and maritime defense. For both countries, the key deterrence strategy is to establish the edge in military balance against the Chinese military in the vast seas between first island chain and the second island chain before China enforced anti-access strategies there. This is extremely important for peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region over the next 2 decades. It is not sufficient for both of countries to merely strengthen their maritime defense capability. China will be launching a second, maybe a third aircraft carrier. Both countries must establish air superiority against carrier-based aircraft to be deployed in open sea in a foreseeable future. I would like to emphasize how the Abe administration achieved an important security agenda for last 1 year and 4 months. Last year, Abe administration passed through the 4 very important policy agenda. One is the establishment of NSC. The second, the issuing national security strategy. Unfortunately, I have not much time to explain in detail. But anyway, NSC and the NSS is a very significant role to play for our national security process. Also, we issued the National Defense Program guideline and the midterm defense program. I hope Professor Yamaguchi refer to both issues in detail. Also, the fourth, the law enforcement strict confidentially on those who have had access to state secret, which are unpopular among ordinary people and media people so far. But this law will be in effect by the end of this year. Still, we are preparing for new legislation, law for this purpose. So 1, 2, 3, 4 major agenda achieved last year. Abe administration tried to achieve 6 security and foreign policy and defense policy agenda this year. One is that already April 1st, Cabinet Secretary passed through the 3 principles on transfer of defense equipment. That is, it used to be a 3 principle for non-arms sales, but we extremely changed the name of these principles. Under these principles, we allow the 2 major policy matters. One is that we can join the international joint development or production of defense equipment. Second is that we can export arms and technology for rescue, transport, warning, surveillance, and mine sweeping. Quite frankly, many countries rushed to Japan to ask for providing our defense and technology equipment to another country, such as Asia, Eastern European country, and also Gulf, Middle East and Gulf area. That is the first one. The second one is reviewing a policy on energy, including nuclear energy. We have 48 nuclear reactors, but all reactors are shut down at this time. Our Nuclear Regulatory Committee has some sort of a safety check for 17 nuclear reactors, which a main electric company has registered, but the outcome has not yet. I don't know how many nuclear reactors will be rehabilitated. Quite frankly, I don't know. But so far, almost 10% of our energy depends on the renewable energy, including hydro power of 8%. So total 10% is renewable energy. So remaining 90% is deeply dependent on the fossil fuel. We purchase a lot of fuel from another country. Last year, we spent 3.6 trillion yen extra money for fuel cost. So electric fees up to more than 20 or 25% in our countries. The problem is that if we try to decommissioning of nuclear reactor in 40 years, our nuclear reactor will be half by the year of 2028 and zero to 2049. So our political leader have to make a very difficult political decision how to replacement with obsolete nuclear reactor. That decision has not been made yet. But anyway, this is a nuclear energy policy. Third is Okinawa, especially construction of FRF, Futenma Replacement Facility. Also, we are facing a governor election this coming early December. We don't know outcome. But if governor say no and Congress say no, mayor already no, and the city Congress say negative. So how to proceed with construction project as scheduled? That is the Okinawa issue. The fourth is the ODA principles review. Our ODA is completely divided our defense capability. But we have to review by putting into some strategic sense to the ODA. The conclusion will be maybe by the end of this year. The last issue is the interpretation of Constitution and the guideline issues. I hope Ishiba-san will touch upon very detailed this afternoon, but I just touch upon the overview and outline of these policy matters. As all of you know, since U.S.-Japan Security Treaty signed in 1960, according to this treaty, impose a U.S. obligation to protect Japan if the Japan's territory receive any armed attack from another country. But on the other hand, if United States ship will be receive any armed attack from another country, Japan has no legal obligation to protect the U.S. SIPs, according to the interpretation of Constitution. Mr. Abe has a very frustrated, and also he strongly would like to make equal partnership or alliance. I think this is the most strong incentive of reviewing these programs. The last October 2013, the both countries reached an agreement of a decision to review a guideline for U.S.-Japan defense cooperation at the subcommittee of defense cooperation by the end of this year. Two countries has been under negotiation on the matter since the last year. I think 1, 2, 3, at least 4 times of negotiation has been finished. Meantime, Abe administration has had its consulting group launch February last year. They have almost 1 year and 5 months study and to make submit the final report to the Prime Minister in 2 years week, in a week, 2 weeks, maybe a second week of this month. But after the receiving the report, the Prime Minister planned to have a matter discussed within the government and within the coalition, LDP and the Kome Party, before the government present the official statement. It will then draw up the bill for amending applicable law accordingly and have them examine again within the ruling coalition, as I said, LDP and the Kome Party, to establish a consensus, which is then officially adopted by cabinet and presented to the ad hoc or extraordinary session of the Diet, which is scheduled sometime by the end of September or early October this year. Once the legislation will pass, the government plan to reflect the outcome to the guideline talks. The report by the consultation group or advisory group is expected to detail legal issues surrounding the response to gray zone situation. That is one. Second, the exercise of collective self-defense right. The third is the participation of collective security mission or collective security based on the United Nations Security Council resolution. The third category, it is to recommend that the interpretation of our Constitution be adjusted to conditionally allow the use of collective self-defense right and the participation of collective security missions. There is the Supreme Court ruling on the matter of collective self-defense right, a so-called Sunagawa case in 1959. The ruling stated, it is our nation's inherent function to be able to implement the measures for self-defense required to maintain the peace and safety and to preserve its existence. The government's interpretation is that the Constitution does not allow unrestricted use of self-defense measure and that it should be kept in a minimum required scope. The use of individual self-defense right to permitted under the interpretation, but the use of collective self-defense right is deemed to be beyond the scope permitted under the Japanese Constitution. The document view within the LDP, I think Ishiba-san referred in detail this afternoon, but this document is to conditionally permitted the restricted use of collective self-defense right based on the interpretation that the minimum required scope of self-defense actions allowed under the Japanese Constitution include not only the act of individual self-defense right, but also an action designed to eliminate offense on Japan's close allies as they amount to the act of maintaining Japan's peace and safety and preserving its existence. The Kome Party, on the other hand, oppose the interpretation of Constitution designed to permit the use of collective self-defense rights. The two ruling parties are expected to coordinate their view and release the official government stance by the end of regular session of the Diet. This is my hope. I don't care. I talked with the Kome Party many times, but the Kome Party stance is very tough. So, but on the other hand, the Kome Party strongly maintain the position as a key member of coalition party. So maybe a Kome Party will be forced to mediate and also some compromise with LDP on the interpretation of Constitution in the foreseeable future. At the extraordinary session, the ad hoc session of the Diet, is expected that the bill for amending a law, including a Self-Defense Force Act or some other act, the many act, Ishiba-san mentioned that more than 10 acts should be revised. But once official government stance clarified, it should become clear to what extent Japan allowed the use of collective self-defense right and cooperate with the United States. Based on these, Japan and the United States should be able to negotiate new distribution of role in a review of guideline, U.S.-Japan defense cooperation. In other words, as I said, so far, U.S.-Japan security treaty is a very unilateral. However, I am in charge of national security business as a member of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially AMPOCA, Japan-U.S. Security Treaty Division. Always Americans understand our legal interpretation of a definition. However, in fact, U.S. government sometimes frustrated because even United States asked for some support or assistance to Japanese side. The Japanese cannot feel Americans' desire by interpretation of Constitution, such as transportation mission in 1992 after the Gulf War crisis, or North Korea crisis in 1993 to 1994. United States government asked for our participation to the inspection of vessel of third country, which can transfer some material from another country to the North Korea. Unfortunately, we cannot say, we couldn't say yes. But on the other hand, we intend to make a best effort within the framework of interpretation, including some dispatching minesweeping 1991 or PKO Cambodia 1992, some oil supply to Indian Ocean since 2001, or host nation support, or some purchasing U.S. Military equipment, including Aegis F-4, F-104, F-35, Patriot, P-3C, or E-2C, or AWACS, or air refuel tanker of some others. However, still, I think this is a legal matter. This is a political decision. I don't know. I personally understand how much United States frustrated this unilateral obligation of U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. Again, our Prime Minister has a very strong determination to find out a solution during his terms. So, but on the other hand, this is a very difficult political issues, how to make compromise, at least ruling party, especially LDP and the Komeito party. Then we can make a government official statement issued by a cabinet secretary, and order the bureaucracy to draft amendment of law to submit to the whole Congress to pass through by the end of this year to affect the U.S.-Japan Defense Cooperation Guideline. That is the most possible scenario. I don't know how much or this process will be going on well. So please listen to Ishiba-san's remarks very carefully this afternoon. Already LDP, almost 3 weeks ago, Komura-san, Deputy President of LDP, explained how to interpret collective self-defense right within the interpretation of government interpretation of Constitution itself. Most of the LDP agree upon this explanation, but again, this is the most crucial timing. I think next several months, I think this is the most important turning point for our security policy for last 6 years. This is my overview of our policy. Thank you very much.
General Yamaguchi.
Thank you very much, Dick. Everybody, I'm very, very glad to be here, to be back to Washington, D.C., where I spent a couple of years, years ago. And I'm glad to see so many faces of old friends of mine. And also, I'd like to thank the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and Sasakawa Peace Foundation of USA for organizing this extremely timely and very important event. And also, thank to those organizers for inviting me to be a speaker. It's quite an honor for many reasons. Usually, military, particularly Japanese military, the military people who are graduated from National Defense Academy talks about classes. What class are you? That is the first question. When I meet somehow new uniform members, the classes, differences in classes of Morimoto Sensei and myself, and a couple of classes I'm behind. And this morning he was looking for coffee. So I thought this is my obligation to find some coffee. But good news is there are some other classes here. Fortunately, they are younger than me. So one of the MD graduate kindly volunteered to buy coffee for us. But more importantly, Morimoto Sensei asked me to talk about the constitution and more the detailed thing in the defense policy of Japan, because he was talking about broad policy as a whole. I have no choice, of course. But I measured physics. And I don't understand legal issues at all. And constitution doesn't make sense to me at all, particularly Japanese one. But I try my best. But time is limited. I'd like to focus on three aspects, mainly operational, related to legal, political, and strategy. And first one is actually Dick asked me to talk about the defense budget. Now, defense budget is for the first time in the last 20 years, Abe administration has decided to increase the defense budget by 2.8%. In the last 20 years, it remained flat, or even in the last 10 years, in average, 0.4% decrease annually. It is really bad news. If you look at Chinese defense expenditure in the last 25 years, according to the defense white paper of the Ministry of Defense, Chinese defense expenditure has become 30 to 3 times larger than that was 25 years ago. It is a lot. And meanwhile, Japanese defense expenditure remained flat. But if you look at the self-defense forces, they are in a good shape. And the self-defense forces have been actively participating in international missions like peacekeeping operations or counter-piracy operations. Why? This is really, the reason is really simple. This is simply because the accumulation in the past. If you look at the Japanese defense expenditure in the past, up until mid-1990s, Japanese defense budget had kept growing 5 to at most 20% annually. If you look at the average, in the 60s, it was 12.1% average annual growth was the defense budget. In the 90s, we had 15.8% for 10 years. In the 80s, almost 9% per year in average. Until the collapse of the bubble economy in the mid-1990s. After 1998, 99, all the countries, including the U.S., NATO allies, have drastically decreased their defense budget, respective defense budget, very sharp. But if you look at the Japanese budget, it kept going up, simply because bureaucratic inertia. But thanks to that bureaucratic inertia, we are in a good shape. But it is that kind of savings are now almost to be exhausted. It is a time to increase. In that sense, Abe administration's the decision to increase the budget is really timely and just marginally in time. Let me show you a couple of the examples of what we have done in the past as a past accumulation. If you look at the Ground Self-Defense Forces, they are equipped with 5 of anti-ship missile regiments, equipped with almost 100-ton launcher, 100 missiles on launcher every regiment, with Type 88 anti-ship, land-based anti-ship missiles. That was designed to cope with the landing craft of Soviet forces, supposed to be landing against, making amphibious landing towards the Hokkaido. We are totally ready to do so. But those anti-ship missiles, fortunately, has enough coverage, the range, to cover all the straits within the southwestern islands, even including the widest gap between Okinawa main island and Miyakojima, which is 250 kilometers. If our army deploys those assets appropriately, our army will be well in good support of just AMSDF and MSDF in achieving maritime and air superiority in that island. That may make a kind of Japanese own anti-access or area denial capability to any hostile entity to Japan or the United States. Of course, there are a number of bad news. One of them is aging aircraft. We have F-15s, that is not too bad. But we still have F-4s, which were first class one during the American friends were fighting Vietnam War. Those aircraft are still in our inventory. It is really urgent to modernize that inventory. And another point I'd like to make is what Morimoto Sensei mentioned, legal basis. For the sake of time, I'd like to mention a little bit, maybe one or two examples. The advisory group for Abe administration is headed by Ambassador Yanai. Happened to be my boss. When I was the attaché here, he was a really good boss. After that, he became the chairman of the advisory group to build legal basis for security and defense. And they have been fantastic job, and particularly they are not even for a man who measured physics, what they propose are quite understandable. And let me show a couple of cases. Actually, what they propose is really concrete cases. One of which is our participation in peacekeeping operations. According to the current kind of interpretation, perhaps if we are asked to help other countries' contingents in peacekeeping operation that are located in the somehow remote place, we cannot go to go and help them. Meanwhile, in the meantime, whenever we have a problem, we ask other contingent to help. They can help us. The almost close case has happened. Even in 1992, when we dispatched the first ever peacekeeping mission to Cambodia, our engineer battalion was next to Chinese engineer battalion, and thanks to Chinese, we were able to take a safer part, because China was supposed to be close to Pol Pot fact, so they took a more dangerous part. As a result, Chinese contingents suffered from a mortar attack at one night, and suffered from 2 killed in action, and dozens were wounded, while Japanese peacekeepers were totally safe. That is kind of thanks to Chinese, we saved our lives. And in East Timor a couple of years ago, our engineer battalion was right next to Korean infantry battalion, which was providing the overall security. Because of that, our engineer battalion was enjoying the safer environment in conducting operations. In South Sudan, our contingents are working with Chinese and Koreans as well as Indians. That place is not necessarily totally safe. And in such a case, I don't want to see in the near future any case where Japanese peacekeepers are asked to help someone, some other country, particularly those from our neighbors, Korea, China, or Southeast Asian countries. And then Japanese, we cannot do that. And then some casualty happens that may create another history issue for the Japanese. So anyway, that is a kind of thing we need to fix. And also another concrete example is missiles. Missile going to somewhere, and if that missile is not coming to Japan, we are not allowed to shoot it down. That is a kind of very, very rigid interpretation. So that part is discussed in case of missile going to the United States, knowing that it is hitting United States, and having the capability to shoot it down. If Japan doesn't do that, the U.S.-Japan alliance would be gone. That is a fear. But this applies not only to the United States. If you look back to 1992, North Korea announced to launch long-range missile towards South China Sea side, or the Philippine area, twice. At that time, we deployed Aegis destroyers to East China Sea and Patriot on the Okinawa Island. But there are a number of admirals and the captains over there, and so I might be wrong, but Aegis destroyers, Patriot, Standard Missile 3 is usually aiming at the ascending phase of missile, or the mid-course. That means if you put the Aegis destroyer really close to the launching point, you can protect very, very wide area of your back. In that case, my guess is Japan might have been able to provide that ballistic missile defense, not only Philippines, but also southwestern part of China and Taiwan and other countries, if it was rightly placed. And knowing we can defend those people, innocent people, and deciding not shoot it down. That is a really, really serious problem if it really happens. So that is another thing I hope the Abe administration can fix it as soon as possible. And lastly, this is a little bit more like my taste. I have been working to fix the relations between Japan and Korea, and I was in Korea last week, and I tried to go to China as often as possible to avoid to Korea. To go to Korea is it's simple. Korea and Japan supposed to be quasi-ally to cope with North Korea's threat. We have to fight shoulder to shoulder, but political climate is not like that. We need to fix it. Otherwise, we will make the enemy happier. That is what we don't want to see. And also, as to China, Sino-Japanese relation is really key. Even though it is tense, it's not totally friendly, but both countries should aim at at least constructive relations, not necessarily nice always. In that sense, national security strategy and national security national defense program guidelines suggested that we have to take a combination of hedging strategy and engaging strategy at the same time. And hedging part looks to me really good, putting focus on Southwest Island, defense of that area, and putting emphasizing the enhancing U.S.-Japan alliance. That may be good for hedging side. And also, NSS says that we have to promote the relation with China. But the strategy, to me, it does not seem too clear. So my kind of frustration is, or my task is after national security strategy and national defense program guidelines is to elaborate and to develop and elaborate our strategy to engage with Chinese, including military to military engagement. Thank you very much.
The first has to do with an area that General Yamaguchi just worked with us on, which was fiscal capabilities. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, there are, as I understand it anyway, the new elements of Japan's security policy that you both outlined for us are only really the most recent manifestation of a fairly long period of strategic salami slicing, sustained but limited efforts to free Japan from a large number of self-imposed constraints in the security realm during the Cold War. I'm referring, going back to the 1980s, to the dispatch of minesweepers to the Persian Gulf in the to sea lane defense in the 1980s, to the dispatch of minesweepers to the Gulf in the 1990s, to participation and to aid given to Allied forces in the multinational effort in Diego Garcia and in Iraq in the 2000s and so forth. All were important, but they were incremental changes. And throughout the process, Tokyo's defense spending has been limited formally, not by law, but by cabinet restriction to 1% of GDP. Now, that's not a trivial amount of money, as General Yamaguchi pointed out. But even the Abe defense budget increases over the past 2 years only bring Japan back to the level of almost a decade earlier, and they pale in comparison to the double-digit increases, the sustained double-digit increases in China's defense spending. And they come at a time when the United States has announced that it is overall cutting its defense budget. So my question, and I wonder on this first point, is how would you respond to those that argue that it's one thing to reorganize administrative units, to add a mission or two on an ad hoc basis, or to remove legal restrictions, but that given the shifting balance of power in the region, and given the potential demands on Japan for participation as a full partner in the alliance, that is collective self-defense, Japan may need to spend more on defense. So my question then is, what is your view of the future of the 1% ceiling? Now, if Japan needs to spend more, if you think Japan needs to spend more, do you think that it needs to depend upon the success of Abenomics? Or should defense budgeting and defense planning take place independent of new economic growth and new revitalization of the Japanese budget? The second avenue that I think we ought to explore is somehow more difficult, even more difficult, and it takes us away from Abenomics and into the realm of Abe politics. As you know well, the Prime Minister's political agenda has been associated by many foreign observers with identity politics, and very rarely in a positive way. Prime Minister Abe, who was applauded for his pragmatism in his first term as Prime Minister, is commonly associated with what's called revisionism, which one might think of as a pursuit of normalcy with a very large rear-view mirror, with a focus on the Pacific War and the post-war settlement. Now, this all came to the fore last December when Prime Minister Abe visited the Yasukuni Shrine, which was an event that even the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo called disappointing. So there's concern at home and abroad that if Japanese foreign policy tilts away from pragmatism, and the very pragmatism that has ensured Japan's success, it will undermine its own interests. There's concern it will alienate Japan's U.S. ally, and that the only beneficiaries of that kind of a change could be Japan's competitors, who have ignored, basically, Japan's many contributions to making a peaceful post-war order, and who portray, I think mistakenly in my view, Japan as a predatory wolf in sheep's clothing. So the question is, would it be helpful I think it would be helpful for our audience to hear you and hear your views on the politicization of the history issue. Does revisiting history help, or does it hinder Japan's shift toward becoming a normal nation? Do you think enhancing Japanese security has either required or benefited from identity politics? Or put differently, and finally, should Japan take anti-Japanese nationalism for granted and worry a lot less about arousing a lot more of it? We can take this in turn.
I was ordered by Morimoto-san to go first. The excellent three questions. As to the budget, I wish we have much bigger budget for defense. But if you look at all the countries, including U.S. or the European countries, all the countries are having a hard time to fix the deficit problem. And a healthy economy or a healthy financial condition is the basis for national security. So I personally want to a little bit increase percentage out of Japanese national spending, but I'm not too much optimistic about drastic expansion in terms of percentage within national budget. But if the economy goes up, that may be increase of defense budget may happen. So let me hope it. As to Yasukuni Shrine, Dr. Wu of Asan Institute of Korea may know much about my opinion about Japanese nationalism. Since I spent 3 days discussing history in Seoul last week. But there may be a number of different perspectives, but my sense is history is to remember. History, we have to remember history. And if particularly war history can be more easily remembered by the sufferers. So the other side have to work harder to remember the history. In that sense, Japanese have to remember history. But in order to remember history, you have to know the history. That is a problem in education in Japan. Now, I don't know current situation, but my experience is that when I became really busy taking care of entrance examination for the universities, the history education just reached to Meiji Restoration to the Sino-Japanese War that period. Never learned after Showa or after 1930s. But I was really interested in that period. So even though I majored physics, I learned history. I spent pretty much time in my college year on history. then I understand the history, bad side and good side. But people do not learn, do not try hard to learn history. My feeling that those people can go either way, very, very extreme, very negative to Japanese history, or very beautify the history. So at least we have to keep remembering history. That is.
Thank you. Thank you. Miyamoto-san.
Thank you. I think some point out that the issue of Senkaku Island and the Yasukuni Shrine and the comfort of women's issues are undermining peace and stability in East Asia. Because Japan is focusing too much on domestic issues and acting a way that lack of a sense of strategic diplomacy. Yet we must remember the Senkaku Island and Takeshima Japanese territory. Since Japanese territory, it's a duty of Japan as a nation to defend them. But anyway, as for the Prime Minister Abe's visit to Yasukuni Shrine, his action based on the largely domestic political circumstances, and he believed as politician. This is my understanding. Yet diplomatic consideration must be always given to domestic politics. In this sense, the visit to Yasukuni Shrine by Prime Minister posed a diplomatic issue. This is my sense. Unfortunately, as you know, Abe-san the first term, and the second term, no one expected. But some group, very strong supporter of Abe-san, strongly push as a second term of a prime minister again. And he would like to realize a very strong expectation of strong supporter who push himself as a second term of prime minister. So I think this is his, I think, a duty as a politician. I think. But of course, many people can criticize that his lack of strategic sense or diplomatic consideration with neighboring country. I agree. But his political intention stronger rather than his consideration with foreign policy. But anyway, as for the comfort of women's issue, I think Japan made a very serious mistake in a case of comfort of women. Such a mistake should never be repeated. Japan has expressed its sincere regret in what is known as Kono statement, and Prime Minister Abe preached not to alter the view. It is Japan's strong hope that the former comfort women of South Korea will accept the compensation offered by Japan as expression of regret. But you look at for example, China. Chinese political leader put the highest priority on stable rule of domestic politics. But in order to do so, he intend to separate political issue and other issue. for example, China, I think China never compromise historical issue and territorial issue. But he intend to back on the business relations or exchange personnel and tourists, and trade and investment and some others. I think this is a current issue. I hope that when China hosts the APEC meeting this coming November, I hope China, Japan, and South Korea summit meeting will be realized. Prime Minister opened the door, always open door. As for the South Korea, I think if you look at the North Korea is very dangerous, very risky. We have to keep a more close relationship among U.S., South Korea, Japan. Unfortunately, our relationship with ROK is not good. I hope that we would like to make a bilateral relationship in a huge prospect. This is mine.
Did you want to say one?
Yeah, just one. As to Yasukuni, even perhaps Japanese have to learn history of Yasukuni too. It's not widely shared, but Yasukuni is enshrined or the warded for the government after Meiji Restoration, wars for Meiji Restoration. So those lost lives fighting on the other side are not enshrined. So in my family's case, in the 1860s, family tree goes two sides. The one side fought for the Meiji Restoration, and one side fought for Tokugawa. So this side are not enshrined. So I need to go to other places to pay homage. Meanwhile, when I was a kid, my grandmother told me, pointing out the two photographs, uncle and grand-uncle. And uncle was died in 1945 in New Guinea, and grand-uncle was died in Manchuria. Then Noboru, when you grew up and go to Tokyo, you have to go to Yasukuni Shrine. So it is really natural to go to natural shrine to visit two ancestors. But I have to go other places as well. And that is not Japanese traditional way. If you go to Kamakura, there is a Engakuji. Engakuji is a place for enshrine warded in the Mongolian invasion in the 13th century. Then the Japanese head tried to enshrine all Mongolians, Koreans, Japanese at the same time. That is actually a Japanese tradition. So sometimes we have that kind of feeling to honor all the war dead.
Well, I'm getting signals here that we really are impinging upon the next panel. If we could go on, but hopefully the rest of the symposium will take up some of these issues and drill a little bit even deeper. So join me, please, in thanking General Yamaguchi and Professor Monami.